The merchant's son raised his hand a second time, and Naoki did not move. He stood in the dust of the small market square, with his eyes fixed on the ground 6 paces in front of him, and he heard the laughter rise around him, the laughter of 3 young men, none of them yet 20, none of them the son of a fighting house, none of them more dangerous than the morning that had carried them out of bed. He was their target because he had been their target many times before. The first slap had landed across the side of his face. The second was on its way. Naoki did not look up. He had not looked up in any of the 7 times these particular boys had found him in this particular square over the past year. And his body had become, over those 7 times, a body that knew with a small animal certainty exactly which way to turn its face. Down and slightly to the left, the way a dog turns its head when it has decided, before the blow has come, that it is not the kind of dog that fights back. Here is the thing that ruins more men than failure. You are not unconfident because the world is too large for you. You are unconfident because you have been practicing every single day of your life the small art of looking down, and the looking down has become so familiar that your body now performs it automatically in situations where a single straight glance would have ended the entire problem before it began.
The boy who could not look up.
The second slap landed. The boys laughed harder. Naoki did not weep. He had stopped weeping at 12. He simply stood and waited for them to grow bored, and waited for them to walk away, and waited, most of all, for the small hot shame to drain out of his chest the way it had drained, slowly, in the days after each of the 7 other times. He was 23 years old. He had told himself every one of those 7 times that the next time would be different, that he would speak, that he would lift his face, that he would refuse, even if the refusal cost him a tooth, to be the boy who looked at the dust. He had told himself this many times, and he had failed many times, and the failures had taught his body a particular shape that the body now reached for without being asked. The boys left. The square was quiet again. Naoki picked up the small bag of rice he had been carrying, the rice he had been bringing home from his father's storehouse, the rice that was the entire reason he had been crossing the square at this hour, and he turned to walk home. A man was standing at the edge of the square watching him. Naoki had not noticed him before. The man was older, perhaps 40, perhaps more. He was leaning on a wooden staff. He had a short blade at his hip and another wooden one across his back, and his robe was patched at the elbows in the way the robes of men who walked many roads were patched. He had been there perhaps the entire time, watching, saying nothing. Naoki bowed his head reflexively the way he bowed his head to all men older than himself. The traveler did not bow back. He did not move at all. He looked at Naoki for a long moment, looked at the side of his face where the slap had landed, looked at the bag of rice, looked at the small downward angle of his head, and he did not speak. Then he turned very slowly, and he walked into the square. He walked to the spot where the 3 boys had been standing. He stopped at that spot. He looked at the dust there for a moment. Then he turned and looked at Naoki across the empty square, and he did something that was not a smile, and not a frown, and not pity, and not contempt. He raised his own face, slowly, the way a man might raise his face to feel the rain. He did not say anything. He did not gesture. He simply raised his face, and he held it raised. And he looked at Naoki across the square the way a man looks at another man when the 2 of them are equals on the road, which Naoki, in 23 years, had never been looked at by anyone. He lowered his face. He walked out of the square the way he had come, and he was gone before Naoki could find a single word to say to him. Naoki stood in the dust for a long time. He did not understand what had just happened. He understood only this, that the small bag of rice in his hand had become, in some way he could not yet name, the heaviest thing he had ever carried in his life, and that he could not this time carry it home. The old archer on the hill Naoki did not go home that evening. He left the bag of rice with the innkeeper at the edge of the village and asked him to send it to his father in the morning. The innkeeper looked at his face, at the red mark on the side of it, and did not ask any questions. He took the bag. He nodded once. Naoki walked out of the village. He did not know where he was going. He had never walked out of the village before. He walked the road north, because the road north was the one the traveler had taken, and he understood, without thinking about it, that the road the traveler had taken was the road he was supposed to follow. He did not catch the traveler. He walked for 4 days. He slept under trees. He ate what he could buy from villagers along the way, and what he could not buy he did without. On the 5th morning he came to a small hill, and at the top of the hill there was an old man practicing with a bow. Naoki sat down at the base of the hill and watched. The old man was perhaps 70. He drew the bow slowly. He released the arrow slowly. The arrow flew into a straw target perhaps 30 paces away. The old man did not seem to be aiming. He did not seem to be doing anything except standing and breathing and releasing the bow, and the arrows, one after another, were all finding the same small place at the center of the target. Naoki watched for an hour. When the old man had finished his quiver, he turned and looked down the hill. He saw Naoki sitting at the base. He gestured once for the boy to come up. Naoki climbed the hill. The old man did not ask his name. He did not ask where he was from. He looked at the side of Naoki's face. The mark from the slap had faded to a faint yellow now, and he said, "Pull the bow." Naoki picked up the bow. He had never held one before. He drew the string back. His arms trembled almost immediately. He had pulled it perhaps a third of the way when the old man said, "Stop. You are not pulling the bow.
You are asking the bow whether it will be pulled."
Naoki froze. The old man continued. A man who pulls a bow with permission cannot release the arrow with conviction. He has already in his own arms told the bow that he is not certain he has the right to draw it. The bow knows, the arrow knows, the target knows, the whole hill knows. He paused. This is the same way you walk into a market square. Naoki lowered the bow. He did not speak. The old man took the bow back slowly and set it on the grass beside him. Confidence is not a feeling. Confidence is a practiced permission. A man who has for many years given himself permission to lift his face, to draw his bow, to take the seat at the table he is offered, to speak the sentence he is afraid to speak. That man becomes a man whose body does these things without asking. The permission has been given so many times that it has become the man. The asking is worn out. The body simply moves. He paused. Most men do the opposite. They practice every day of their lives the small art of withholding permission from themselves. They look at the floor when a stranger enters. They lower their voice when an older man speaks. They sit slightly smaller than they need to. Every one of these small withholdings is a coin paid to the part of them that is afraid. After 20 years, the part that is afraid is rich, and the part that should have been confident is starving. Naoki looked at his own hands. He thought of every floor he had looked at, every voice he had lowered, every seat he had taken at the edge of a room. He had never thought of any of these as choices. He had thought of them as the natural shape of his life. He understood, sitting on the hill, that the natural shape of his life had been a thing he had been making, one small withholding at a time, since he had been old enough to walk into a room with other men in it. The old man handed the bow back. "Pull it! I am not strong enough. You are not weak. You are asking. Stop asking." Naoki took the bow. He drew the string back. His arms still trembled, but he did not stop. He pulled the string back to his ear. The old man placed an arrow on the string without speaking. Naoki released. The arrow flew. It did not hit the target. It hit the dirt 3 paces in front of it. The old man nodded once. That arrow was worth 1,000 of the arrows you would have shot tomorrow if you had walked home today. The target does not matter. The pulling without permission was the lesson. You will stay here until you forget how to ask. The morning the asking stopped, Naoki stayed on the hill for 9 months. He did not become a great archer in those 9 months. He was clear about this. The old man did not teach him to aim. The old man did not teach him to score. The old man taught him only one thing in many different shapes, the small inner motion of pulling the bow without asking it for permission. He pulled the bow 10,000 times. Some days he hit the target. Most days he did not. The hitting was never the point. The point was the moment inside the pull, the moment when the string was halfway back to his ear, and the small familiar voice rose inside him and whispered, "You cannot do this. You are not the man for this. Stop now and lower the bow." And Naoki, every time, instead of obeying the voice, completed the pull. He did not silence the voice. He had learned in the 3rd month that this was impossible. The voice had been built over 23 years. It would be there until he died. The only thing he could do was keep pulling the bow while the voice was still speaking. And after enough months, the voice grew quieter, not because it had been defeated, but because the body had stopped consulting it. On the morning of the 271st day, the old man set the bow down beside him on the grass and said, "You will leave today." Naoki looked at him. "I have not yet. You have. You no longer ask the bow. I watched you draw it 20 times this morning. None of the 20 drawings contained the asking. The asking has worn out." The old man stood.
"Go back to the square."
Naoki understood in the small silence that followed that the old man had known about the square from the day Naoki had climbed the hill, the slap, the boys, the dust. He had never asked. He had not needed to. Will the boys be there? Not the question. The question is whether the boy who walked out of the square 9 months ago will be there. If he is, the slap will land again. If he is not, the slap will not land, not because the boys will be stronger or weaker, but because the body that arrives in the square will not be a body the boys can find a target on. The targets do not exist in the dust. The targets exist in the body of the one who walks into the square. Naoki bowed once. He walked down the hill. The walk back to his village took 6 days. He did not hurry. He did not rehearse what he would do. The old man had told him in the 2nd month that rehearsal was a small form of asking permission from himself. The body that had stopped asking did not rehearse. On the 7th morning, Naoki walked into the market square. The 3 boys were there. They were older now. The youngest had grown a thin beard. They were standing at the same corner where they had stood 9 months before, and one of them saw Naoki, and his face broke into a slow recognizing smile, and he nudged the other 2. Naoki did not stop. He walked across the square at the same pace he had been walking on the road. He did not slow as he passed them. He did not speed up. He did not look at them, and he did not look at the dust either. He looked very simply at the direction he was walking in. He passed the 3 boys at the distance of perhaps 4 paces. He could feel his own breath. It was even the catch at the top of it, the small tight catch that had been the shape of his entire life until 9 months ago, was not there. The catch had worn out the way the asking had worn out. Quietly in the body on a hill while no one had been watching. He did not know whether the boys would follow him. He understood, walking past them, that this had stopped being his problem. Whether they followed him or did not follow him, whether they spoke or did not speak, whether they raised a hand or did not raise a hand. These were no longer events that would happen to him. They would only happen to themselves in the dust of the square while he kept walking. They did not follow. Naoki reached the far side of the square. He turned onto the small street that led to the storehouse. He did not look back. The boys had stopped speaking behind him somewhere in the middle of the square. He had not raised his own face. He had only carried it at the height a man carries his face when no one in the square is taller than he is. And the boys had decided, in the small reptilian part of their attention, that the boy who had walked into the square was not the boy they had once been able to slap. He walked the rest of the way home. The bag of rice on his shoulder felt this time no heavier than the morning. The name on the hill Naoki did not go back to the hill. He had thought, walking home from the square, that he would climb it one more time and bow to the old man and tell him what had happened. But by the end of the 1st week home, he understood that the old man had not wanted thanks. The old man had wanted only one thing, and the one thing had been done in the square the previous morning, and the doing had been the entire conversation, and he did not go back. He took up his father's storehouse. He carried the rice. He spoke to the merchants. He stood at the height a man stands at when no one in the room is taller than he is, and the merchants began slowly to treat him as a man they had not noticed before. Not because anything in his face had changed, but because his face was, for the first time, where it was supposed to be. His father noticed it within the month. His father did not say anything for a long time. Then one evening, sitting by the lamp in the small room at the back of the storehouse, the old man looked at his son across the wooden table and said, "You went somewhere. Yes, you did not say where. I did not know where I was going." His father nodded slowly. "I went somewhere too, when I was your age. I did not tell my own father where. I came back and I could not explain what had happened. He died before I had the words." That was all he said. It was the longest conversation they had ever had. 2 years passed. Naoki did not become a famous man. He continued to run the storehouse, and the village began to come to him for small judgments. The kind of judgments older men come to younger men for, when the younger man has stopped being a man who can be slapped in a square. In the 3rd year, a traveler came through the village. Naoki did not see him at first. He saw only the small gathering at the inn that evening. 5 or 6 village men standing outside the door, speaking in low voices, the way men speak when something larger than the inn has stopped on their road. Naoki walked over. He looked through the open door. A man was sitting at a low table at the back of the inn, older now, gray at the temples, the wooden staff leaning against the wall beside him, the patched robe. Naoki understood in a single breath that it was the traveler from the square. He did not enter the inn. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, and then he stepped back from it and he walked across the street to the small stone bench outside the rice merchant's shop, and he sat down. He did not need to go in. He understood now what he had not understood 3 years ago, that the traveler had not been a man he was supposed to thank and not a man he was supposed to follow. The traveler had been a man he was supposed to become. The walking in tonight would only be his way of asking the traveler for permission to be the man he had already become, and the asking was the one thing he no longer did. He sat on the bench. The innkeeper came out of the inn an hour later. He saw Naoki on the bench. He walked across the street. He sat down beside him without speaking. After a long silence, the innkeeper said, "He asked who you were." Naoki did not turn his head. "He saw you in the doorway. He said only one thing. He said that man does not need to come in." Then he went back to his rice. Naoki did not speak. The innkeeper sat with him for a long time. Then he stood and went back to the inn and slid the door closed behind him. Naoki did not move. He sat on the bench until the lamp in the inn had been blown out and the road had gone dark, and somewhere inside, a man whose name was known in provinces Naoki had never seen had lain down in a small back room and would, before dawn, walk out of the village along a road none of the villagers would ever follow him on. Naoki had heard the name once. He had heard it in a story at the inn 2 years before. The story of a man who had walked into a square and raised his face at a boy without speaking. The innkeeper had said it under his breath. Miyamoto Musashi. Naoki stood up. He walked home. The square he crossed on the way was empty. The dust was the same dust. The boys were gone. The boy who had once stood in that dust was gone too. And the man who walked across it now carried his own face. At the height a man carries his face when he no longer needs the world to confirm that he has the right to. That is all confidence is. A man who has stopped asking, walking through a square that has stopped being able to answer.